To order. We got a couple more members coming in, but today we're going to look at Senate Bill 111, and we have the Honorable Distinguished Senator and Chairman of the Higher Education, Seth Hart. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's my delightful pleasure to be with y'all. I feel I'm amongst friends. Unlike some of my folks over there, I don't wed well with an axe and try to cut things up. I'm here today to try to make the process. Your good Chairman of the Rules Committee and I have worked diligently on a lot of things, and we're going to continue to work diligently on a lot of things. Senate Bill 111 was brought to me at the request of the Regents and the university system, all in present. Under present law, what we have is a scenario where tuition lapses at the end of the year. And with the advent of the 6-4 program, keeping tuition the same and getting folks out of school on time, they keep a certain amount of tuition, and what this bill does is allow them to keep those funds not to lapse and go into the general treasury of the state. And this will allow each university to maintain those funds, keep those funds. They must budget for them. It's not like a slush fund or anything else. The 3% figure was arrived at by doing the auditing of the numbers. The total cost will be approximately $24 million. These funds will be maintained by the respective universities for the students are matriculating, and it's to compensate them allow them to have these funds to offset the tuition freeze that occurred with the four-year gap on keeping tuition the same. I'd be delighted to answer any questions. I always hazard to use the phrase simple bill. There's nothing up here that we do simple. The bill does have significant financial ramifications that can be staffed by everybody. But I believe that's gained in it, and I would ask you to support it.
Any questions? What number?
One.
Chairman Lewis.
Hey, Senator, thank you for that presentation. I got really an elementary question on this. It's been a while since I've been to college and had to pay tuition. Can you just real briefly give an example of when a student pays a tuition and part of that tuition lapses over? What's going on with the actual dollar in this scenario?
In this scenario, those funds will be retained by the university. The percentage that we set forth, and they will be retained by the university, will have to be into their budget process, accounted for in their budget process, and then they can be extended as the university saw fit, as they do any other tuition that comes into the university, which they use to pay for future tuition for future salaries and things like that. The normal expenses of the university.
So I guess what would tuition money be used for now if this is extra left over and the extra would be used for what you just described? What would most of it be used for?
Quite frankly, it'd probably be used to offset the increases that will occur in salaries, the increased cost of the various things that occur in the university system, that healthcare and all the other ancillary expenses that we have. They'll go into the budget. It's just like the tuition. What this will do is keep us from having to, as you know, we're locking in tuition for a year. And this will allow the normal increases that would occur. These funds will be available to offset those normal increases that would occur during that. The exact amount, I believe, is Mr. Daniels has given me, it's $1,948 for the research school, $1,280 for 4-year schools, and $802 for 2 years.
Could you repeat that again, please?
Per semester.
Per student.
Could you repeat that again?
Yes. $946 for the research per semester. $1,280 per student per semester.
Could we, as members, have a copy of that, please? We'd like to be able to look at that. Representative Chokers, do you have any questions before you leave? How long will you be gone? You coming back? Okay, because we're going to be here just a short time here. Okay. Thank you, sir, for being here. Appreciate you waiting, too. Representative Royal.
We have
funds lapse and go into the general fund.
General fund state of Georgia?
Yes.
So that would probably make this a revenue bill, which the Senate can't have to do.
Well, I think I know where thou comest, sir, and it's not a revenue bill in the sense what we're doing is we're allowing them to keep funds for things like
But the money now is going back into the general fund,
that would be, that's correct.
which would reduce the general fund.
That's correct. That's correct.
Any questions? I've got some. If you could, any other questions for Senator Hart? Thank you, sir. If you'll hang around just a minute. Thank you.
Dr. Daniels is here from the region, we have, and also our fiscal clerk.
Mr. Tom Daniel with the Regent, could you step forth and answer some questions, please, sir? Thank you. I'm wondering, thank you for coming, Mr. Daniel. I've jotted down some notes relative to what Chairman Royal was saying. Going into the lapse funds, General Treasury, how many dollars are we looking at in over the last 4 or 5 years? Do you know?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bill Bowles is here, our Chief Financial Officer. If you will, I'll let Bill answer the question about our annual lapse.
Our general amount of lapse has been in the neighborhood of between 1.5 to 2.5 million.
Could we get a copy of that as well, in addition to what? I mean, later. Yes, sir. Okay. How many schools are affected by this if we do nothing? How many schools or colleges would be affected by this if we did nothing?
Well, it would impact every institution, because every institution retains its tuition revenue, which is used to pay for its ongoing costs. So every institution in the system is affected.
And how long has this been known about this lapse fund into the general fund?
Well, the idea here is that when we approved the fixed for plan, the concept here was that we wanted to be able to establish tuition rates in a way that we're recovering some amount of the cost, because we're going to have to cover the cost of each of those students over a 4-year period. And what happens if you don't provide for that, then every year you're starting over again. But what happens is, first you have one class, then you have 2 classes, then you have 3 classes. By the time you get to year 4, in order to cover the cost that tuition revenue is expected to pick up, which is about 25% of the formulation level, you have to have a very large tuition increase in order to accommodate that. What this bill does is allows us to average that out over 4 years and avoid having that kind of situation.
So we heard about it last year, and we're hearing about it now. Why not 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago? Why didn't we do something about this then?
Well, the big thing right now is because there's a change in the tuition policy. When we set up the fixed for plan, we said to students, when you start at the University of Georgia in fall of 2006, your tuition is not going to increase over 4 years. That's very different from the tuition policy we have in the past, and that's why this has become so critical right now.
Okay, Mr. Daniels, if you'd come back, I'd like to talk with you about last year's House Bill 1294 relating to lapse funds and technology fees and continuing education fees. Question to you is, can you account for every dollar that was saved from going into the general fund relating to those technology fees and continuation fees, continuing ed fees?
Mr. Bowles and I should put together a report that shows the impact of the legislation that you guided for us last year. That was House Bill 1294 that was adopted last year. And then there was also the history of Senate Bill 73, which was adopted in 2003.
What number was that?
That was Senate Bill 73.
continuing education, technology fees, and indirect cost recoveries. And then the legislation that you helped us handle last year, House Bill 1294, added department sales and services.
For the members' purpose, could you please quickly describe to us technology fees, continuation fees, and
yes, sir, I'll try.
What were the other
continuing
ones?
Education,
indirect cost recoveries.
Continuing education fees is where the university system institutions serve Georgians who are seeking non-degree programs. This is professional development of a personal nature. It can cover the gamut of a degree being used as a profession, or it can be, not a degree, a program for pleasure. I mean, we offer it for small business men and women. For instance, if there was an individual in Georgia that wanted to become a florist, they could go to one of our institutions and take 3 or 4 or 5 continuing education courses in floral design. It's a service of the university system, but it is not degree. The technology fee is several years ago, the University System Board of Regents added a mandatory fee to its students, and it's earmarked to help us keep up and stay ahead of the technology demands. The indirect cost recovery is when our research universities are successful in achieving federal grants and contracts. Along with that grant and contract comes a program called indirect cost recovery, whereas the federal government includes in each one of those grants an amount of money that's used to cover the lab technician, the rent on the building, the copier, the supplies, and the things associated with the grant. Department sales and services are things like our auxiliaries, isn't it, Mr. Bowes?
That would be like charges that we have to other agencies for services that we provide. For example,
I can't hear you, sir.
You have to stand up.
yeah, departmental sales and services. First of all, the biggest part of that category of funds is the continuing education fees. That's the vast majority. It's a subset of departmental sales and services. But departmental sales and services, for example, would include when we provide a service to another entity and that entity provides funds back to us for that service. For example, we provide Galileo to non-state agencies. Funds that come back to support those costs are considered departmental sales and service.
Mr. Daniel, back to indirect cost recoveries. Is that not used as part of bond packages, revenue bond packages, to finance various buildings and structures on university campuses? Is that not part of the package? Maybe perhaps the Coverdale office building, Coverdale building on the University of Georgia campus?
The Coverdale Research Center would be a good example at the University of Georgia, yes, sir, where indirect cost recoveries associated with federal grants and contracts would be used to pay for that building. I mean, as you well know, the Coverdale was like a $40 million building. You graciously provided $10 million. The federal government supplied $10 million, and the University of Georgia Research Foundation covered the other 20. Yes, sir.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, House Bill 1294 from last year has a sunset next year, correct?
It had a sunset of 2008, yes, sir.
Okay. In that event, if we do nothing with 1294, then these bond holders will be short that part relating to indirect cost recovery fees. Is that not correct?
Respectfully, I don't think so, Mr. Chairman. I mean, in that you are allowing us to carry forward indirect cost recoveries now, and the bill that is Senate Bill 111 would not have a negative impact on the ability to carry forward indirect cost recoveries.
I'm really speaking toward 1294 from last year.
Yes, sir.
If it lapsed in the year 2008 and we did not move it to another sunset, then the bondholders could perhaps be shorted, or
yes, sir.
What
yes,
would
sir.
happen?
Right. When you helped us adopt House Bill 1294 and we all agreed to a 2008 sunset, we have it on our plan to come back to you next year to ask you to continue or that sunset. Now, if you'll notice, when we originally, the original version of the Senate Bill 111 did not change the 2008 sunset. It did not change it. The original version introduced. The as-passed version changes that 2008 to 2011.
And so Senate Bill 111 has no sunset provision. You're trying to make
no,
this
sir, it has a sunset of 2011.
Okay, I see.
The as-passed.
Thank you. All right, now let's go back to the bond indebtedness. If we do nothing next year relating to the sunset of House Bill 294, how does that affect the bond holders?
If you did nothing, we would have to use other funds to retire those debts. If you made it impossible for us to use indirect cost recoveries, we would have to use other funds because we would have to honor the debt.
How much is indirect cost recovery relating to this carry forward? Do you have a? I don't mean to.
Let me ask Mr. Moses if he has such a number.
You could let us know.
Okay, just a second.
The number for the current year, the carry forward on that is just about $38 million. That's for fiscal year 06.
Are you done? Okay. All right. Is that Representative Royal? Chairman Royal.
Just want to follow up and make sure. I think Senator Hall gave this number. Well, what is the 3% of the tuition collected? How much is that going to be? That's the amount that's not going to last.
$24 million.
$24 million?
Yeah. Out of a total tuition revenue is about $800 million.
They have you put $24 million holding it back that has been lapsing into the.
See, Representative Royal, we would not have been generating this money prior to now. Under the fixed for 4 concept, when a student who enters our program this 2007 fall semester at Albany State University, that person is guaranteed the same tuition for 12 semesters, 4 years. So that's why this piece of legislation is much more important to us, is because if we do not have the ability to carry forward tuition under the fixed for 4 concept, it's going to make us more inefficient than we care to be.
I understand that, but your other alternative would be come to the legislature and ask us to fund it through appropriation. I want to make sure I understand how much money, regardless of this program. Some $24 million has been lapsing into the.
No. Didn't you tell them how much we did lapse?
I think I need to explain the lapsing situation. We only lapse money that we don't spend. So whatever we get, when we get to the end of the fiscal year, whatever we don't spend is what comes back to the state treasury. Now that's our
tuition in here, which hasn't been in there before.
No, tuition's been part of it. We've treated tuition and state appropriations like this, collectively. So at the end of the year, we're spending money from tuition and state appropriations.
The auditors come in, they look at what we've spent, and they say, here's the surplus that's coming out of the Board of Regents. And as I said before, that number has been between $1.5 million to $2.5 million. And that's out of a $2 billion plus budget. So the very, very, very small amount.
But that did not include tuition.
Well, it was based on tuition. We don't retain tuition and carry it forward currently. That's the issue. That's the problem we have right now. So if we don't spend our tuition money in the first year, whatever we don't spend of tuition money lapses back to the state treasury.
And that amount is?
I'm sorry, what?
And the amount is?
Well, it's part of the $1.4 million.
Where did $24 million?
The $24 million is what we're saying would be the limit on the amount we could carry forward. So in other words, if at the end of the year, as I said, we have a total tuition revenue take of about $800 million. If at the end of the year we had not spent, let's say, $30 million of that amount of money, $6 million of that would still lapse back to the state because it exceeds the $24 million, which is the 3%. The 3% is a limit on how much we can carry forward. Now, the reason it's $24 million, the reason it's 3%, and this is something that Senator Harp referred to, is to say we did a projection on what we would need to get from those students who will come into that guaranteed program for 4 years. What would we need to get from those students to have their share of tuition pay for their share of the total costs? And again, as you know, the formula is 75% state, 25% tuition revenue. So we said, what is the amount we need to get? We calculated that based on some projections of what the formula would be over the next 4 years. Okay, when we did that analysis, it turns out that we would get let's say $22 million from each class, and based on what we think the tuition increases would be, there's so much that carries forward. So the maximum amount, it turned out to be $24 million. And then we said, okay, we'll make that the maximum amount we could actually carry forward. And as I said, if we carry forward more than that, then more money is going to lapse back to the state. So if we carry forward $30 million, but we can only carry forward $24 million by virtue of this bill, $6 million will go back to the state of Georgia.
Under current Georgia law, without this bill, that money is going back to the general fund, and the legislature is going to have to
reappropriate it, or it just goes back, and then we go back into the budget process next year, in the following year.
Representative Lewis.
So, if I may ask either one of y'all, if what I'm hearing is correct, and what I hear y'all explain with lapsed funds, whether it's not to exceed 3%, or if it continues on is it fair to say that our universities are a quasi tax collector for the state?
Well, if you consider tuition as tax revenue,
well, it's coming to the general fund, and that's revenue to the state.
Well, as Mr. Bowes has indicated, the university system over the last few years has been lapsing less than $2 million a year. So we're using the money that you allocate for us and that we generate through tuition, and we're using it as effectively and as efficiently as we can. With this new Fix for 4 tuition program, we're going to be generating more tuition in the first year of the program than we normally would. And instead of spending that money and rushing to spend it, or using it not as wisely as we would like to do, we're just asking for the ability to carry tuition funds from one fiscal year to the next. And that's the genesis of this bill. I mean, if we had not had the Fix for 4, we wouldn't have this bill. Now, if you had asked me, we've always wanted, in essence, the ability to carry forward tuition, but it hasn't been available to us, so it's the Fix for 4. Go ahead.
There's one other alternative that I want to point out, and that is that we would lapse the funds. They would go back to the general treasury. and they'd be down here on our doorstep begging for those funds and appropriations in the following year. So what this is a fiscal prudent methodology that allows them to project actuarially out the 644 program, what it's going to cost, and allows them to keep and manage those funds. But the hardcore reality is, if we don't do this, those funds will lapse, and they will be down here on all our doorsteps, respectively, saying they need more money because they did not have these funds available.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hart, hello.
Yes, sir.
Assume that this bill passes and we stop lapsing funds to the state treasury, so the regents are left with these somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. Has been the history of this. Is there further accountability? Right now we have some accountability for tuition revenues and state revenues as they go. Will they be credits against essentially what their request will be the next year? I guess what I'm getting at is, which is the tail and which is the donkey? Is tuition the tail? Is that the safety net, or is the state funding the tail or the safety net? And if we do agree to this proposition, I'm not saying I don't think it's a good idea at all. I'm really not. Will we still have the accountability over what could be up to $24 million going forward? I understand why the tuition has to be more early in this 4-year averaging methodology. I truly do. It's kind of a weighted average, almost like we were dealing with inventory on a weighted average basis. I understand the concept. I also was an accountant in a fund-based system before, and I have to tell you, and it had to do with government. It was my job every year to make sure we threw away enough money at the end of the year to where we didn't lapse any funds. And I mean, we had stuff stored in 5 states that went obsolete in boxes to where we got that amount the next year. So I learned quickly that's not a very efficient way to manage taxpayers' money. So I think I'm for this, but what accountability? Will there be a number submitted back here? Will it show as a credit against a request from us the next year, or how will we know how to account for these otherwise now not lapsed funds but retained funds with the universities?
I'm going to defer, but also I want to comment. All of our universities are audited. They go through a very strenuous audit process, and the idea is that process makes, when we get a budget presentation from the regents and everything else, the universities have been audited, the regents have been audited. I mean, we have numerous checks and balances throughout the system where when they come to us, we're trying our best, they are trying their best to come up with dollars and cents numbers that are real dollars and cents, reflecting real need and real cost of what it is to provide this world quality education system that we're doing here in Georgia. So I believe that the checks and balances are there. I think this is a prudent methodology that will afford them this process and will afford them these funds. The alternative, I say, is that the alternative is that we get back to asking for money and coming back. They're coming back and increasing the amount of money they need. And I really think you hit on something that's critically important. I remember the old days when long years ago, was a young officer in the Marine Corps, and we would be poor as a church mouse until we got to that last month of the fiscal year. And then we spent money like drunken sailors because we had to get that money if we were ever going to get money, and we had to demonstrate the need for those monies when we went back to Congress and said we were broke, we'd spent all the money and everything else. And this is fiscally prudent, a fiscally prudent managerial step. I'll point out another thing. The 3% is a cap. If the amount of tuition is greater than the 3%, then those funds do, in fact, lapse. We arrived at those figures by negotiations with the fiscal office, negotiation with the budget office, all of the various budget functions The state looked at these numbers, came up with these numbers, and that's how they came up with this cap of 3%.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yes.
Because that was going to be a follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
I noticed the first iteration of your legislation did not have the 3% cap, if the information I was provided on the history of the bill is concerned. What was the genesis of 3? I mean, why would we go from $2 million to $24 million as a cap? That's a pretty horrendous, percentage-wise at least, cushion there. I mean, what was the...
This is when the program starts. This is when it begins.
I'm just saying your first bill, as it was introduced, had no cap. Then the 3% showed
We
up.
crunched some numbers.
But why 3? Why not 1? Why not 2? Why not 10?
Let me comment on that. Actually, the 3% is sort of your check and balance. Because without the cap, then we could carry forward as much as we had at the end of the year. So go back to my earlier example. If we generated $30 million or we had $35 million at the end of the year, we would carry forward that whole amount.
Again, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but why do we care? If that's accountable against your budget request, aren't we just saying keep the money instead of sending it back and having us turn it right back around to you? If you stay accountable, or is the thrust of this to where we lose accountability of those funds? It becomes unearmarked in any way.
Yeah. You don't lose accountability. In fact, one thing that we are operating under the Budgetary Compliance Act, so we have to account for those tuition revenues separately, in fact, right now from state appropriations. So we have to account for how those dollars are going to be used. The issue is, if we did not have the cap on there, that the dollars that we could generate would be unlimited, that we could carry forward. The cap serves as a check on that. It's saying to the university system, we want you to have the flexibility to carry forward funds, but we're not going to make that an unlimited amount of money. We're going to cap that at 3%. And that 3%, as Senator Harp said, we worked that out by looking at what would we actually need to cover the costs of those students who would come in under that guaranteed tuition, that fixed for 4 tuition program. And that's how we came up with it. And it's just right there. So that, to me, is your check and balance on the program.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to dwell on this, but again, if we maintain accountability of that, and it shows up as a credit against what you're asking us for in year 2, year 3, and year 4, if we're the dog and not the tail, why do we care about a cap? If you carry forward $50 million and we get a $50 million credit, and we know it's spent for your mission, why do we care?
Because we wanted those funds to lapse.
Why?
Because in honesty in budgeting, all we were asking for in the legislation is to have the funds to pay for the 6-4 program. If additional revenue is generated, it properly belongs to the state. And the 3%, it's like this. This actuarial study is done that says, how much is the 6-4 program going to cost? $24 million. How much, what percentage of the of the budget of tuition will equate to that number? And 3% was that percentage of the tuition that equated to the funds necessary to cover this period, the needs for the 6-4 program. And properly, we did not feel that we should take the funds. Those funds are properly the state's funds, and they should come back to the state.
Thank you. Mr. Daniel, could you, we got one question here. Representative Lane.
I'm still not sure that I understand, what we're trying to do. How do you determine what the cost of this 6-4 program, whatever you call it, is? 4 for whatever it is?
One of my greatest frustrations, Mr. Chairman, is that you, as members of the General Assembly, do not get credit for the wonderful support that you show the university system and its students. A student can go to Georgia Southern University and enroll this fall and pay over the course of the next 4 years $10,240. And that's all the tuition they have to pay for a 4-year degree. And when Mr. Chairman Bob Smith's son was going to Georgia Tech, if he had entered into this program, and he was not, but if he had entered into this program, a 4-year degree at Georgia Tech is $15,568. So thanks to you, you've been able to keep tuition very reasonable. And you do that by supplying approximately 75% of what it costs the university system to educate our students. This Fix for 4 program is an initiative of the Chancellor and the Board of Regents to show parents and grandparents and guardians and students who are paying their own way exactly what the tuition is going to be for a fixed period of time.
All right, can I stop you right
Yes.
there? Do you feel like that the tuition is going to be more in the last year than it is the first year? Is that why we're trying to lapse money and have that money?
Well, under this Fix for 4 program, let's go back to the way it was. In a fiscal year, we would have charged the tuition for students, and we would have spent all of that money. We would have spent that money in that year. Under the Fix,
you said that you were having $1.5 million to $2.5 million lapse.
But that's not necessarily tuition money. I mean, it's all one pot. It's state funds. State funds. You give us $2 million, but yet the university system is a $5 billion enterprise. At the end of the fiscal year, we're lapsing $2 million. Okay. Under the Fix for 4, the base of that tuition increase is obviously we're having to generate slightly more tuition revenue the first year than we otherwise would have, because it's a Fix for 4 program. And
you average 4 years.
Yes, sir. And we just didn't want any incentive for institutions to waste the money, and we want them to be able to carry forward tuition. That was the genesis of the bill, and but we'll be glad to.
I'm getting there. But let me hear it.
Yes.
You averaged the cost that tuition was going to be for 4 years.
We established a new floor.
So the first year, you were actually going to generate more money from tuition than you were going to spend.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And so you had to carry that over to the next year, and then in the last year maybe it might cost you. Your tuition might be less than what.
Yes, sir. Here, I don't have these examples. I don't have these figures that I can hand to you, but I think this might help everybody. If you were a freshman at Georgia Southern University and you were ineligible for the Fix for 4, okay, you were not eligible for the Fix for 4, and you would be paying you'd be paying at Georgia Southern, you'd be paying $1,268 per semester. Now, the student that started in the Fix for 4 is paying $1,280. Only a little bit, only a few dollars difference, but $12. But over a period of time, that's going to matter. So that's how we came to asking for this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Representative Royal.
Let me ask you one other thing. When you're, I don't know how you do it. Do you bill hope for this on those scholarships?
Bill. Georgia residents that are on Hope, yes, we don't build Hope, but it's the institution works with the Georgia Student Finance Authority. The student does not pay the tuition. The Georgia Student Finance Authority transfers that money to the respective institution.
Okay, it's full freezing the Hope Scholarship money too? You're not asking additional dollars from Hope?
No,
In subsequent years also, you're freezing their tuition?
yes, sir. I mean, this is not the Fix for 4 concept makes no distinction between students that are on Hope and students that are not on Hope.
I'm wondering about the money transfer from the state on Hope. It doesn't go up either. Tuition remains the same.
The tuition would remain the same for the student.
Yeah, for those students whose tuition is flat, the Hope Scholarship would obviously be flat. But until we get to that, but there are going to be some students who are going to have tuition increases because they were already enrolled prior to the implementation of this program. So I just want you to be clear about that.
We've got a question from the Honorable.
My other questions earned me honorable, I guess.
You say all these adjectives and Honorable O'Neill.
Can I talk now, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Well, let me ask you, before we go any further, the Honorable Chairman of Higher Education, Bill Henry, has been mighty quiet today.
Well, I was hoping you would assign this to a subcommittee so we can iron out all these issues as we should.
One last question. I'll leave you alone because I think I understand it now. When you were calculating the 4-year average, which, by the way, I love the Fix for 4 concept, I do. Obviously, you would have been looking at tuition inflation over historical periods of time. How did our tuition inflation relate to consumer indexes? More or less about the same?
I'll comment on that.
Yeah, I would have to say that our tuition increases have been slightly higher than the Consumer Price Index. But I will say this, the state of Georgia's tuition increases have been much lower than most other states across the country. Most of them have had double-digit tuition increases. We have not. We have averaged about 5-6% over the last 10 years. And our assumptions, excuse me, and our assumptions in looking forward are sort of based on that 6% assumption over a period of time, and that's where we came up with 3%. So this is, this is a very conservative estimate. And
a 6% annual assumption on that. So okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Representative O'Neill, I think we as Georgians can singularly be proud of what a college education costs in this state. My good friend Chairman Smith and I have been to a number of national conference seminars and programs, and every time I go to one of those things, I come away with the feeling that we're doing it right in Georgia. The tuition here, while we've had modest increases, the tuition, if we compare what we do in Georgia to, let's say, Michigan or let's say Texas or some of the other states, we are so far down, and I mean down in terms of the increases. Our increases have been modest, and it's attributable to the legislature because they've kept the fiscal reins on, and that goes back to the Regent's creation. And I give credit to Governor Sanders when he created this process. I give credit to the stewardship of those folks that came before me and came before all of us in this process. There has been fiscal responsibility here in Georgia, and this is just another small tool that will aid in that fiscal responsibility. And frankly, I'm singularly proud of what's going on. Most of you know that my alma mater is on the other side of the Chattahoochee River over in the adjoining state. It's a disaster. They go down to the legislature, and all of those schools fight from one another. They all have lobbyists. They're all begging, and they drive the legislators crazy, and there's so much fiscal irresponsibility over there. What we do in Georgia is we are envied by folks all around us. I think that this is a step in the right direction. It will give them the funding mechanism, again, to pay for this 6-4 program. And it's fiscally responsible for us as a legislature because it's not open-ended. If tuition got $50 million, then all they're getting is $24 million, and the rest is going back to the state general fund.
Thank you, the Honorable Senator Seth Hart, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Could Mr. Daniels step forward again, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Daniel, is this, would you say this is the number one priority for the Board of Regents this session?
Legislatively or budgetarily?
Sir?
Are you talking about just legislation, or does that include the budget?
Is the Senate Bill 111 the most important thing the Regents need this year?
It's not more important than the budget, no, sir.
Well, other than that, as far as legislation is concerned.
It's our priority number one piece of legislation, yes, sir.
Did the governor approve of this?
In September, when all executive agencies were asked or told to submit their legislative requests to the governor's office, the Board of Regents and I did so. And yes, the governor's office is aware of this initiative and is supportive.
Mr. Daniel, did anybody on this committee or anybody on the higher ed committee, were they consulted about this piece of legislation at about the same time or before Senate Bill 111 was dropped in the hopper?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, and that's a subject, which I'm so sorry and regretful about. I mean, I've expressed that to you. I just made the mistake. I thought that I had worn you out enough on House Bill 1294, and I was going to give the other side an opportunity to share out my welcome. But it was not a direct affront, and I'm sincerely sorry for any grief that I've caused you or any of your other members.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. We've got a number of questions, so
okay.
I'm going to assign this to a subcommittee, and Chairman Jeff Lewis will also chair that one.
All right. Sure.
Representative Johnny Floyd, Representative Larry O'Neill, Representative Richard Royal, Representative Bill Hembry, and Representative Mike Chokas. If y'all would meet at your discretion, and also invite all of the rest of us to the meeting and see if we can't have some resolution to this very important legislation that the Regents need. Thank you very much.